my levels, it's funny, my levels keep defaulting to like minus 42.
Hey, did you just turn it up? That sounds better.
I can hear you better.
42. Isn't that the meaning of life?
Yeah, I did. Oh, does that sound better now?
It sounds better whatever you just did to it.
For us.
But that's so strange. Why would my Audacity levels impact the levels on Zoom?
It wasn't really quiet. It was just quieter.
Okay. Cool. Well,
All right.
good.
Let's start for the listeners out here. PillPod 154. We were covering the liberals' end of history, and almost nobody is happy with that, including the liberals. Not particularly, at least Fukuyama. But just to catch everyone up, history's over because despite any rhetorical oppositions you may have, or even anti-liberal groundswells in a few places dotted throughout the globe, or anti-capitalist groundswells throughout the globe, there's ultimately no serious alternative to mostly free markets in states with some liberal rights peppered in. So we got rights to vote, rights to speak about most things, and that's pretty much the best we can manage for the foreseeable future, unfortunately. And indefinitely. So revolution's always just going to be beyond the horizon, and global capitalism has proved that it's adaptable enough to deal with most of the crises that it itself creates. So we read Francis Fukuyama over 3 episodes, and he uses some, I think we can say, some bizarre and just sometimes terribly myopic, oversimplified reasons for how we arrived at our current status quo. But despite his weird wagon trail, we all have to admit, I think, that we are all in some degree Fukuyamaists, whether you like it or not.
It was not actually something that I even expected, and I'd read it before, or I'd read parts of it before. I am curious, Pills. What was the reaction from the patrons to like our whole series?
Well, the one that I can remember offhand is the liberal vibes are strong with this one.
With this episode or with me?
No, with the episode.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, listen, we kind of all agreed that you may not like it, but until like Germany invades France again, or Trump abolishes private property, this is the world we live in. So another phrasing that is more palatable maybe to leftists is that the end of history means it's a lot easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. That's kind of even Fukuyama's point, rather than all of the caricaturized versions of him, despite how much bad shit and wrong shit and straight up revisionist shit that he says.
And those
does
catastrophic events didn't even affect his thesis anyway. Like the fall of the Roman Empire is still, there's still progress. Culture restarts and then reaches heights that Rome never reached. So there's still progress there. Sorry, I should mention I'm recovering from a severe illness this week, and I'm going to be a little bit low key.
Why be so vague about it? It was just COVID, man.
Yeah.
If you say severe illness, I feel like that sounds scarier than COVID.
Yeah, that's worse. We all got it.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I had the coronavirus.
Is this your number 2 or your number 3?
I've lost count. I think it must be number 3.
Yeah, I had it 3 times.
I don't know.
3rd was the worst for me.
Yeah, the cold sweats. That doesn't sound fun.
Yeah, I was in a waterbed all week, just soaked.
Yeah, that happened to me one of the times too.
Well, we can speak of 9/11. We can speak of COVID. Are these real events that give an alternative to the current order? Not really. They lead to the same consolidation.
Right. I guess people thought maybe COVID would lead to alternatives. I remember people were even kind of talking about that. They're like, look at all the stimulus money that they're giving. It's like, maybe this is showing that it's possible to have like UBI. But would UBI even be a genuine event? I mean, I don't know. I think you could see it through the lens of Fukuyama as just a further elaboration of the values of like liberal democracy or something, of just like cementing, some kind of social safety net for maintaining the status quo.
Well, the thing with the COVID payouts, like businesses and large businesses got more of a payout than the average family got, which if everyone's getting the same payout, ultimately you're losing the value of the money that you're
I guess
being
it's
given.
economy stimulus. That's what it's aimed at.
Now, just to offset the criticism that will no doubt come, the Marxists and the anarchists they'll still tell you, no, bro, it's just the contradictions. Wait for it. But if we ignore the 15 of them for a second, sorry, we thought for today that it would be fun to horseshoe theory this bitch.
Yeah.
So we went to the conservative side. And these weirdo Christ-following Catholic conservatives, they are also not happy about the end of history. So if you object to the end of history, Marxists, and if you want to make a deal with the devil, we have found a team that agrees with you. Here they are, Catholic conservatives.
Yeah, totally. They're I was actually just looking behind me for one of the more recent books that also I think speaks to a rejection of the end of history thesis, which is Patrick Deneen's what does he call it? Why liberalism failed, right? And like that's very much a conservative critique of, and you know, to be honest, to the credit, and this sort of lends credence to your horseshoe theory thematization here, because in that book, you know, he spends a lot of time actually saying really nasty, justified nasty things about capitalism and all the ways that it destroys, you know, social life. So I think the post-liberals of Patrick Deneen, you know, he actually very much adopts a kind of something that has a family resemblance with Marxist critique of capitalism.
Can
but
you
it has
summarize
more of a
his
more
critique? Is he Catholic?
Yes, he is Catholic, very much so, at Notre Dame University. Yeah, I mean, his thesis is like essentially that liberalism has its own, it's like a contradictory sort of argument about like internal contradictions within liberalism, that he says that like liberalism sort of creates the conditions of its own destruction because of it's the ways that it basically erodes social and moral values and economizes everything and basically like extracts meaning from life. And he definitely has like a religious spin on it, but it is like very much in that theme of, oh, it's digging its own grave because it's destroying all values. and it's actually not that different from sort of what Fukuyama says about The Last Man, except it has an even darker spin to The Last Man, right? It's like saying that that's actually ultimately going to be a destruction of its, and that's also why, like, I don't think that Fukuyama's thesis is as triumphant as it seems. He's just saying it's going in this direction, but like it's an open question of whether like people are going to be happier, right? They're just going to be more secure, but happier, I don't know.
Could I suggest a different framing than horseshoe, though? Because, you know, horseshoe theory. Yeah. Well, hear me out, because we haven't really given the left a hearing. Like, Fukuyama is not representing the left side of the horseshoe.
No. I'm saying
No, Fukuyama's right in the middle of the horseshoe.
I'm saying Fukuyama's the center of the horseshoe.
He's center right, and now we've strayed a little farther to the right. So this is more like fishhook theory, where one side is curving around. We don't know what the other side is doing because we haven't done the leftist take on the end of history yet. I wouldn't put Fukuyama there as the representative of the left side of the horseshoe. That seems a little crazy to me.
No, the Marxists are the left side.
The Marxists and the anarchists who are like, look at the Zapatistas. This is the model we should be following.
Yeah, I love it. They love the Zapatistas.
I think we would have to maybe substantialize how Marxism is, what we're going to be talking about is somehow coinciding with what Marxists would say about the end of history. I've seen what like David Harvey says about this stuff, and it's very different.
I mean, we conflate all the time conservatism and the right wing, but this is the first time in recent memory. This is the first time in recent memory that I actually read straight up conservatives that are like, this was all better 300 years ago. So they're not historicists, but they are historicalists in that history is good, and the further we get from it, the worse off we are. And reading this shit,
they're not blowing on the progress trumpet so hard.
True. Yeah, it's all about regress. We used to watch great films like Lord of the Rings, and now we watch shit films like Disney that are making your kids gay. We're going to introduce our sources, but reading this shit makes me miss Heidegger, you know? Because sure, he was a Nazi mysticalist, but at least he was an interesting conservative. Like these shits are the intellectual right, but I'm not seeing the intellect. I spent hours on this website. And they're mostly just whining about Disney movies and whining that the kids are on TikTok instead of going to a biblical hermeneutics class like everybody used to do, I suppose.
And just getting married and having 5 kids.
That's what they should be doing.
Exactly.
You should be putting your 5 kids to bed, each with their copy of the Chronicles of Narnia.
They're on TikTok instead of that.
Anyway, who are we talking about? I found this gem of a website. I was doing research for something else and I stumbled across it. It's called the Imaginative Conservative.org. So I sent you guys a few articles, but yeah, I spent a long time. They do.
How many articles did you read?
They do movie reviews. They do like current events reviews. Surprisingly, not a single word about Israel.
Huh.
But it's a little self-referential universe dedicated to making the West great again. I think with Catholicism. But I guess we didn't try hard enough with Catholicism the first time, so we have to have another go.
Christianity is like their first drop down.
I noticed that one of the authors of, I think there's like 2 articles that talk about the end of history that I read, and I think one of them said like something about how he was referencing some other Catholic thinkers, and I think he says, despite them being Catholic, they have the most interesting things to say. So that made me that led me to believe at least that the guy who was writing here was like actually more of a Protestant of some kind.
Do you know what was his last name?
Let me see if I can find where he says it. Let me see if it was on this one.
Because a lot of the Protestant quote unquote intellectuals, they valorize Catholic intellectuals. They can't make the jump. They can't make the leap.
I feel like this is something I've noticed tangentially a few times. Like my parents are friends with this history professor who's retired now. For a while he was teaching at like, what's it called? There's like this Christian Protestant school in Toronto, like a university, Tyndale,
yeah, part of U of T, right?
Exactly. Or no, it's not part of U of T. It's actually its own independent private school.
Oh, I thought it was connected.
And he was teaching there, and it's funny, when he retired, I was like, he was visiting my parents, and he was like, oh, I became a Catholic. I was like, after that, and I was like, oh, really? I was like, interesting. He's like, I'm like, what? Like, why? Like, do you mind if I ask why? And we'd had little debates about like euthanasia and abortion in the past. Like, we have like discussions about that stuff, and he obviously takes the more Christian perspective. And it was just funny to me that like right after he left his teaching post at a Protestant university, he was like, okay, I'm Catholic now. And then I was like trying to figure out why. I was like, could you just explain it to me? He's like, well, it's really complicated, but I guess the answer would be because I want to be able to participate in the body of Christ.
You can't do that with like rock bands and like overhead projector concerts.
And you can't do that with like boring Protestantism, I guess.
Okay, let me read the about page of this website. The Imaginative Conservative is an online, and note, online has a dash in the middle. It's on dash line. An online journal for those who seek the true, the good, and the beautiful, by noted Catholic philosopher Plato. We address culture, liberal learning, politics, political economy, literature, and the arts, and the American Republic, in the tradition of Russell Kirk, T.S. Eliot, Edmund Burke, Irving Babbitt, Wilhelm Röpke, Robert Nisbet, Richard Weaver, Emmy Bradford, Eric Vogelin, Christopher Dawson, Paul Elmer Moore, and other leaders of imaginative conservatism. So I don't know who most of those people are, except for T.S. Eliot and Edmund Burke. But I do also know one of the names on this list, which is Eric Vogelin, because he made this let's say fun, interesting claim that Marxism and Nazism are both modern day Gnosticism, and modern day Gnosticism is the real threat. So if you guys have heard of
that's the horseshoe
if you guys
theory.
have heard of this very let's call him self-assured Twitter user, James Lindsay, I guess this is his source material. So what is Gnosticism for Vogelin, you may ask? Well, Marxism, communism, National Socialism, progressivism, liberalism, and humanism. Leaves you wondering what's not Gnosticism.
Yeah.
That's the horseshoe theory. If you go far enough to the left, far enough to the right, you end up in the same place.
Exactly. Yeah,
Gnostic, apparently, which is strange because that's something very specific.
Because they're imaginative conservatives, I gotta say, it's quite imaginative to just say that anything you don't like is identical to a loose group of like 4th century mystery cults. That's some pretty, it's fun shit.
Yeah, do you want to define Gnosticism just to give the listener?
I have no idea how he defines Gnosticism.
No, but could you, Eric, or just like how it's traditionally understood?
Well, Gnosticism were like basically Neoplatonic cults. Sorry, I'm not Eric, but they're like Neoplatonic, but not really Christian. And the Christians define them, I think, in probably about the 3rd century. They define them as heretics, and they use Jesus quite often, but they deny the materiality of Jesus because one of the core parts of Gnosticism is that the world was created by a fallen God rather than the perfect good God. So the world that we live in is created by the demiurge, which is also the God of the Old Testament. And we're trapped. We're trapped here in this material cage. And then outside of the world somewhere is Sophia, the true wisdom. And basically the world you look around, you see, and it's evil.
I think it also is like a mixture of Jewish and Kabbalah and kind of apocryphal teachings, and that there's secret messages in religious literature that could be decoded. I mean, there's some pretty cool stuff there, but it's being used, obviously, like that's a specific historical understanding of it. This way of using it is just to use it as like use it condescendingly, use it as a slur. But it's actually quite cool.
This is imaginative. I'll give that to them. But I think the issue that he has with Gnosticism, this Eric Vogelin guy, is that it assumes that humans can fix the world based on their own efforts, which is his problem with Marxism, leftism, liberalism. It's like you need the transcendent to rescue you from the world or to redeem the world, but humans can't do this on their own, which is why liberalism is also a form of Gnosticism.
Yeah, secret teachings.
And there's also some fun shit on this website, man. Like the movie review section, the only movies that they like, unsurprisingly, are Gran Torino and Lord of the Rings.
Gran Torino.
The review for Oppenheimer is titled "A Cry for Truth in the Wasteland."
Guess they didn't like it.
They have a whole bunch of tenets, right? I only copied down the first two, but their tenets are: first, number one, the conservative believes that there exists an enduring moral order. That order is made for man, and man is made for it. Human nature is a constant, and moral truths are permanent. And then second, the conservative adheres to custom, convention, and continuity. It is old custom that enables people to live together peaceably. The destroyers of custom, i.e. the woke left, demolish more than they know or desire.
The opposite of all those is just liberalism then.
Yeah, so you can see why they would oppose the end of history, because we're on a slow decline towards, the death of the things that they think are important, which is we listen to Dua Lipa instead of Tchaikovsky.
Yeah, what was this original article that you sent us? The demolition of the Western mind?
There's so many articles about the death of the West, which is why I thought it appropriate to bring up on a end of history, because they're trying to stop the decline, I guess.
Yeah, well, I remember when you sent that to me and you said something about the end of history, and I read through it and I was like, that's weird. I was like, what is this article? I mean, it's funny, but what does this article have to do with the end of history? And then I searched within the website, and then I saw that there were at least 2 other articles about the end of history and read those. But I mean, It's pretty. I guess this article is mostly him going through stuff that C.S. Lewis wrote in like some one of his books, the Screw Tape Letters. Is that right? Have you read that?
I have. I think it's the devil is talking to a different devil, and it's how to trick humanity into believing. It's kind of like that. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to convince humanity that it doesn't exist. That kind of thing.
Right, and he takes a bunch of quotes from it. He talks about like same-sex marriage and like other stuff as being signs of,
decay,
the fall of Western culture.
In the second tenet, custom, convention, and continuity. So it's like, if you're going to change anything, change it really slow. Our ancestors should have a vote. Like there's a reason that things are the way they are, that is not arbitrary. So conserve the history.
Well, yeah, and they're also reviewing some book by, it's actually a book review, right? Okay, my bad. Sex in the Unreal City, The Demolition of the Western Mind by Anthony Esolen on Ignatius Press.
It was a Ivy League trained person who then took up working for private Catholic colleges in the States. Classic career path for right-wing cultural commentators of a Catholic persuasion. And this is the guy you were thinking of. He's an evangelical Protestant who admires conservative Catholic critics quite a lot. Like, it's one of those Protestants that is so conservative. He's like, I might as well have just been born Catholic. I wish I was, what did he call them? A cradle Catholic? It's a weird terminology.
Yeah, he says, quoting him from the article, he says, although I am an evangelical, most of my favorite conservative cultural critics, Joseph Pierce, Peter Kreeft, Thomas Howard, Holly Ordway, Dwight Longnecker, and the late Richard John Newhouse. I think that's the only one I've heard of. Not to mention Chesterton and Cardinal Newman, are Catholic converts. Okay, so wait, these are all people who weren't Catholic but became Catholic. So that's kind of funny. It's like he's setting himself up to be like, that'll probably be me soon. As a cradle Catholic,
fantasy.
Dr. Esolen brings with him a deep sense of rootedness.
Imagination knows no bounds.
Exactly. The importance that rootedness reverberates.
Oh, it's just Heidegger.
Heidegger was raised a Catholic, so
yeah, he was a Thomistic scholar. He's a really, really good one, from what I hear.
But while we're talking about history, I don't know if you guys know about this, because I don't, but I want to figure it out because I don't really get it. Because Christianity has this very weird relationship with history in terms of its metaphysics. And I don't find it really consistent, and I'm going to probably get called out for this by people who know more than I do. But I did take a religious studies history cross list course in grad school. But it seems to me like we got the Old Testament. It's called the Old for a reason. It's the Old Covenant. But for all intents and purposes, that kind of is saying, none of this background really matters except for Christ, because Christ replaced the shit. And the past is replaced, even for us today, at a physical location in time and space, like in our world. It's not exterior to our world. It's first century Roman Empire, Palestine. So what I don't get is Christ always existed, right? Then he comes from outside of history and then dies and then goes back to outside of history. And yet we're all here doing stuff for some reason, like waiting for him to come back, I guess. Isn't that already the end of history, that nothing we do actually matters after 30 AD?
No, that's Protestantism. That's more like what John Calvin and the predestination people believe, that you can't know, but you can't actually change whether you're going to be saved or condemned in Judgment Day. That's like, Calvinism. No, because the Catholicism has to have that whole apparatus of the church to decide, and you have the kind of extra biblical baggage like purgatory and indulgences and things like that, and the whole church hierarchy.
But what is the purpose? Like, I've read Augustine's City of God, but beyond that, what's the purpose of the church in history? Is it to like make the whole world Christian? And why does it have to make the whole world Christian? Because Christ is going to come back and like judge everyone anyway, right? There's a final judgment.
Oh, they're the temporal church. That they started out as the kingmakers when they started crowning kings of Northern Europe with Charlemagne in 800 AD. And it was a political entity. I mean, it's hard to say, like, why does it exist? I don't know. St. Peter gave the keys to the Roman Catholics and they've passed them down.
I'm not
ever
asking
since. I
that.
don't
I'm
know.
asking, what is the metaphysical purpose? Is it just like the purpose of history is just so people can live a life and figure out who's going to heaven and who's not going to heaven? Is that
the city of God? Yeah. Sort the sinners.
or is it to change history? Is it to find out who goes to heaven, or is it to change the world into the image of the city of God?
It's like to turn the world into a assembly line of good Christian souls. I don't know, man.
I mean, they had their shot. They had their shot in the Middle Ages. So if that's what we want to return to as imaginative conservatives, then go for it.
All the corruption really fucked them up. And the Protestant split. They can't carry out their mission properly anymore. It's so sad. That's why they want to go back to Catholics, these conservative Protestants.
I do have another metaphysical question about Christianity. If you die and there's like heaven, but heaven as we know it, I don't think it's in the Bible. It's like invented in the Middle Ages by like Dante and people. But do you go to heaven when you die, or do you have to wait till the final judgment? Because there is that. And then like heaven's probably outside of history.
Wait, is the final judgment in the Bible? Like, by the way, I'm like extremely unchristian, grew up in an atheist family, so like I probably have like less than no education. Like, so I knew that heaven and hell were kind of like an invention that doesn't appear in the Bible at all. But does final judgment appear in the Bible?
I think it's a revelation thing.
The second coming. Yeah, the apocalypse.
But also Jesus himself says, like, the master's coming and he's going to separate the sheep from the goats, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, Judgment Day.
But like if heaven's outside of time, when you die, did everyone actually just die at exactly the same time? Like, even though Augustine died 2,000 years ago, if you get to heaven because it's outside of time, did he also just get there?
I mean, how the hell am I supposed to know that?
No, like,
I'm trying to figure out the mechanics.
Oh,
I want to get in there.
You can ask those questions with like, well, where does free will come from? Why is there evil? You know, like what was Augustine's answer to the free will question was almost like, you can say it like a metaphor, like God kind of inhaled and like left a little bit of space in the universe for free choice. And that's like, and then in there you have temporality too. But it's weird to think of, yeah, there's no time in eternity. So everything's just sort of all there. And then now there's this sort of temporal space where events have to pass in order, and there's a future and a past and a present. And the Catholic Church is the temporal manifestation of Christian values. And you have all this problem of then reconciling that with eternity.
So I guess if it's atemporal,
I'm trying to figure out the metaphysical question here, because this would tell me what Christians think history is for if it's not over. Because these guys, right, these Catholic, imaginative conservatives, what they think makes time worth it is, are you watching Lord of the Rings, which is a good movie because, I don't know, fucking Aragorn is Jesus or something? Or are you bad and watching woke Disney promoting a sexual agenda for children, which is an article I read on this website, which is a gold mine. So what is the purpose of being alive? Is it just to see if you can get into heaven, or are you supposed to be changing the world?
It's a test run. It's a test run to see how you do.
Yeah, like,
yeah, I mean, if it's atemporal, that is an interesting question the more I thought about it. Well, then presumably it's true, because if it's like outside of time, then yeah, like you would think that everyone would just get there at the same time, because there is no, so like they would all be there already. like, or something, right? Like, or you'd all be there at the same time.
This makes Calvinism make some sense to me, because if it is outside of time, you are already there if you made it.
Right. Yeah, if you made it, you're already there, right?
Oh,
And
I
it's
wish-
just like, so you'd be...
I wish I knew you were going to ask this, because then I would have read Augustine's Confessions has a whole section on temporality at the end, his philosophy of time and what it's for.
That's a good section.
Actually,
Great.
Actually, here's like a little Star Trek reference to come in. If anyone's seen, I think it was the first Star Trek movie to feature the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Generations, I believe it's called. And it was notably not a very good movie, but also notable for having Captain Kirk and Jean-Luc Picard meet and like beat some bad guy together. But there's a whole subplot about this thing called the Nexus that people are trying to chase and get into. And basically, like, when you get there, it's like basically like all your like unfulfilled memories, like all the things that you wanted. It's basically like a heaven kind of that you'd imagine it. But like, it's funny. What's making me think of it is like, I remember that the scene where Jean-Luc Picard gets pulled into the Nexus and finds Captain Kirk is like, I just got here. And Jean-Luc Picard's like, oh, like, you've been dead for like 80 or 90 years or whatever. Right. So anyway, I think the Nexus, clearly, if we see the Nexus as an analogy or like a sort of I don't know what the right word is, I guess, kind of like a riff on heaven, then, I mean, they seem to think that, yeah, it would be outside of time. So everyone would feel like they got there at the same time, which is exactly what's depicted in the movie. Like, Jean-Luc Picard shows up and he meets Captain Kirk and he's like, I just got here. It's like, so did I. So,
But then also Jesus wouldn't know that he's taking so long to get back, because he should have been, like, in the 1st century AD, Christians were so convinced that Christ was going to return that they were like quitting their jobs and shit. And we've seen this repeated, like, with multiple cults. I think the Adventists did something like this. But no, Jesus is coming back on this day. You can quit your job. You can rack up some credit card debt real quick.
Max of your credit cards. Yeah, that's the best one. I guess you'd have to erase your own memory and then wake up in temporal land where things are imperfect and linear, because up there in space, before, they discovered that the laws down here apply up there, they thought everything was perfect and round and circular and repeatable and eternal. And then down here in the sublunar zone, everything was kind of corruptible and, one thing after another, temporality kind of.
Anyway, what do we do as imaginative conservatives? So for them, I guess they haven't thought about any of this, but Western civilization is being lost. It's in the process of dying. So they quietly accept, I think, that history is ending, but they're going to return and like museumify the good things that the West did. And they're going to keep, listening to Tchaikovsky and watching Lord of the Rings instead of Disney.
can I just say to you, like, the two articles that specifically reference Fukuyama's The End of History? I mean, I don't know if you want to move to that yet, but I mean, it was just striking to me, like, the fact that all of us are fresh off of actually engaging with that text, like how much it's obvious that they didn't read it, like, I mean,
Yeah.
but no one read it, but still, like, it's extremely obvious that they didn't read it.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff in there that they say that, like, is just not, I mean, I don't want to like quibble with like boring points, but like, it's just very obvious. And I think one of the things they say is like, oh, Fukuyama thinks America's the best and he wants the whole world to be America. But like, Fukuyama's definitely pretty clear that like America's not what he had in mind about the end of history. And, James Madison and all this stuff. I don't know. It's kind of funny.
Well, I wanted to float this because they make it appear like they are actually looking backwards into history, but of course, history doesn't move backwards. So they're looking into a fantasy, a nostalgic fantasy that they've presented about history as the future. And I think that they would even say this too, that we can move forward into a more Christ-centered culture where we paint pictures of Jesus like Da Vinci did instead of painting soup cans. And this is a symbol of decay and degradation. But they fear the end of history and they want history. They want history to be conserved, except in this museumified way. Like, we read this really funny article about the book, and the guy is just ranting about how books are dying, and he says Kindles will never replicate the smell of an old book, and that this kind of shit. But I'm just confused again to the logic of this. Like, God intervenes, presumably, by saving the world from sin. He sends Jesus, or God, I don't know. Jesus sends himself, I guess. But then, like, he didn't do very well if we need this website to exist. Why do you need to save the world if the world's already saved and history's over? Because they aren't happy about any of this stuff. So is their purpose just to then preserve a museum of intellectual curiosities until God comes back and finishes the job? Because they're bemoaning the end of history, as we all do, but I don't know what they think their purpose is here.
Well, I think they also, at least in the short,
attend to their own salvation and stop worrying so much about everyone else's.
That seems reasonable, doesn't it? Like, go focus on your life instead of bitching about Disney and TikTok.
Yeah, but Christians, that's what makes Christians so annoying, is they're just so obsessed with converting everyone.
If the end of history is coming and it's Judgment Day and you're sufficiently prepared, you believe you've done all you can to, stick to the ways of the Bible and live a life free of sin and be forgiven of the original sin of Adam and Eve and all that sort of thing, then what are you so worried about? Like, why are you worried whether they're like the new Lord of the Rings has people of color in it? Like, why is that so fucking grating on your sensibilities?
Yeah,
like,
it's true.
Yourself and your own soul.
Oh, I should have stipulated. They like the original Lord of the Rings movies. They don't like the new one.
Oh yeah, of course.
The
they
Hobbit,
don't.
you mean?
I could have like the series, the TV
cartoon
series.
Oh, you mean the show on
God.
Prime or something like that?
Yeah.
Also, that's why I love Jews so much, because I just love that they are just like, yeah, like, we're the chosen people, and like, we don't want you. And I'm like, great. I don't want to be that either. It's like I love the non-proselytizing. It's my favorite. It's one of my favorite things.
Well, this is what's so interesting about history, right? Like, you can go back in time and be like, okay, like in 1492, Queen Isabella gave this decree and said all the Jews can either leave Europe or convert to Christianity. And you can then start asking these historical questions, like, why was this happening now in this time? In 1492, the same year that Columbus discovered, the New World, and the same year that also the Moors were finally like kicked out of Europe. The last Muslim stronghold in Europe fell to the Spanish rulers. Like, you can ask those questions, but when we're just doing this sort of like vague cultural commentating, fear-mongering stuff, there's no truth anymore. It's all just like smoke and mirrors and people's opinions, and I don't like this development. This development's good. It's all such bullshit. Like, I love the history of it. Like the Jews were persecuted in history. Like, why is that? And what are the consequences that we continue to live with because of that prejudice and persecution? But like, the level of argument that these kinds of websites have is like, there's no evidence or like basis for making claims at all. It's all just
they make all kinds of outlandish claims.
Yeah, it's all just, and people fall for it. It's that seduction effect again. Like, people fall into it and get sucked in, and it's immersive.
Well, because I feel like what happens too is like, people have a vague sense of just like how they don't like the way society is. And then if someone can just speak to that vague feeling, they just get seduced by something like this. But I do love the part, and I think the first, the end of the end of history article, where like he's talking about Biden and the Democrats, and he's just like, he's basically saying, oh, Fukuyama's wrong because like, look at China and like a bunch of other stuff, which anyway, setting aside like why that doesn't necessarily invalidate Fukuyama's thesis, forget about that. But now he says, actually, this threat has been growing for a good while now. But at this historical moment, the United States seems poised to make, shall we say, its own great leap forward, referencing China. That would be a leap in the direction of Chinese-style centralized government and one-party rule. And this is written in 2021, by the way, right after Biden was elected. At least that seems to be what a unified Democratic Party is poised to attempt. The margin of power is close, but the will to act is there, and many other pieces are in place. Donald Trump may be gone, but that will not be enough. So I just like love how they're just all of a sudden, because Biden won, they're like, oh, like the Democrats are trying to impose one party rule literally right after Trump just tried to steal the election. So this was less than a month after January 6th. And, again, they're just like, yeah, the real threat's the Democratic Party, like trying to cement Chinese style communism.
Like, what motivates these kinds of statements? It's like, how does any of this affect the purity of your moral soul and your salvation? Like, they need to do some serious Loyola spiritual exercises and try to get back in touch with their spirituality, because it seems like they're confused and angry, and they don't. Why do these temporal events affect your salvation? Is my question. And these sort of petty politics that in 1,000 years are going to be like footnotes in history books.
God, I wish we could invite one of these writers on the podcast to interrogate them and just be like, what's like, could you like try to settle some of these metaphysical questions about your belief systems? Because like I'm trying to buy in, but it's just not making sense, you know?
They just love like the Renaissance, I guess, because it's Christian art.
But they don't go on about the dignity of man too much, do they?
Well, yeah, they don't go on about the feudal order in which those works of art were created either. But okay, I'll give you a long-winded quote. This is one of their articles about the left. Why celebrities leave the left? No dream. The right has an advantage over the left in this field. It does not have to present an abstract vision of the future. It offers the security of a return to a past Christian order. The left may hate and distort this order, but it cannot deny its existence and verifiable claims. The Christian order points to highly attractive historical accomplishments, cultural developments, and heroic feats. Conservatives can have recourse to the memories of happier times. The left's memories of past utopian nightmares, like communism, are not so happy. The lack of a dream signals a deep crisis inside the left that cannot be underestimated. It is an existential problem that leaves it without an achievable goal. The past notions of socialist utopias are unraveling in a woke nightmare of identity politics and irrational discourse that attracts no one. Celebrities are leaving the left because there is nothing left to appeal to their rational minds. The socialist agenda is hollow, unwelcoming, and incoherent. For all its defects, the rightist vision still seeks beautiful dreams. It can always appeal to that audacious dream of an order turned toward Christ that so transformed the West. This is fun. This is fun. But obviously, any leftist post-Rousseau is going to look at the, quote, highly attractive historical accomplishments and cultural developments, unquote, and be like, look at the mode of production that produced this. If you were born there, chances are 95 out of 100, you're a slave. But instead of dealing with any of that, no, it's we don't have the capacity to dream. This is the paranoid fantasy that we just don't like Christianity. Not that we're opposed to slavery.
It's amazing that how politics is so close to religion here. Like, that's the state of the political discourse.
Remember how great everything used to be when everyone just believed in Jesus? If only I could go back and be born a sharecropper, I wouldn't have to deal with looking at a woman being the main character of Lord of the Rings.
It wasn't great for everybody at all. A narrow group of people at the top of society, like Pico della Mirandola, was a nobleman.
It's puzzling though, because I mean, I'm just like kind of browsing through the different articles. I was just looking at the culture section, and then now I'm looking at the section that they call Republic, right? Which to me, right away, when people start using that word, like American religious people, you know that there's some sort of weird worshipping of the American Republic system. And I don't know, like it's strange. I mean, I need to read one of these articles, and I did just open one up where they're saying like, you know, what the Federalist really said. So they're talking about the Federalist Papers. But it's just puzzling to me that these like hardcore Christians, like the weird fusion between Christian fundamentalism and like a weird, almost quasi-religious worshipping of like the Declaration of Independence. Because so many of the American founding documents, I feel like, kind of set the stage for a lot of the stuff that they hate. Like, I don't know. It's just like how do they keep those two things? I mean, they might be really critical. Like, and there were kind of signs in the 3 articles that I read actually where they didn't necessarily love the American system. And obviously we can't assume that all the writers agree with each other, but it's just a little puzzling to me that they, and the fact that they even have a section on the website called Republic, like, just to me, that is a sign of some kind of reverence for the American Constitution and the American constitutional system, which to me like sows the seeds of the very like degradation of culture that they're talking about. I mean,
even back then, but all of history, right? Instrumentalizing religion for political purposes has been an enormous, and the opposite too, using religion for purposes of critiquing power, right? It happens both ways all the time. And, this is a very not self-critical kind of thing when you use it in the service of power, or you use it in the service of your own political views. You say, well, my political views are on the side of, we have God on our side, and the godless leftists and the godless socialists, like, look what the damage they're doing to the world. Like, it's so, it's such an old, tired argument, but it keeps working. It's a perennial one. It comes back in different forms. It's a hydra, and in the end, it never works. But I mean, I guess it does work sometimes in the sense that, it does have an effect. But I always think that it's a negative effect, right? But, using it in the service of promoting whatever conservative political views is probably not the most, it's probably a bit of a sin in itself, but you'd be hard pressed to convince these kinds of people of that.
The left that they're objecting to is not really what we'd call the left. It's just anyone left of them, which includes liberalism.
It's a
like
boogeyman.
Tolerance is bad because if we're tolerant of everything, then a soup can is art instead of, Michelangelo's David being considered art. But it's so strange, because then I wonder what is your purpose are you trying to change the rest of the world and the rest of culture because that's better, which is they think it's just hitting the rewind button. But beyond that, what is your purpose? Are you trying to convert people to your cause? Like, ostensibly, that's kind of the goal here. But why do you even need to do that? And this is kind of where I'm confused about, what does it take for Christ to return? Does the world have to be in order, or does Christ come back after the world has gotten so bad that there's nothing else to fix? I don't understand what they think their civilizational argument is even for or doing, except to say the cultural aesthetics used to be better before, and now they're bad. And from where I'm sitting, this is not just irrelevant to Christianity, but actually hostile to Christianity. Because I read what Christ said in the Bible. I don't know that he ever spoke about aesthetics at all, because this would belong to the category of the things of this world. And the things of this world are fundamentally in conflict with the stuff he talks about in terms of God's kingdom or the kingdom to come.
I think it's a pathology.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I just have so little insight into it because I just grew up in such a that for me to get inside the head of a Christian, like, I feel like maybe I just have no idea because I cannot get into their heads.
Oh, I wouldn't know either. I'd have to speculate. I think just, the only way this is Matthew McManus territory.
Yeah.
But I suspect it's pathological, Not saying we all have our pathologies.
Yes.
And this is one of them, being this kind of character type. They probably are super down with a conservative form of authoritarianism, but not a leftist, not one they would perceive as leftist, and they probably think West is the best and everyone else is dog shit. And I mean that's a certain pathology, and then you sprinkle some religion on top of that. So there are left-wing Catholics, and they're just like there are right-wing Jews and there are left-wing Jews. There are left-wing atheists, right-wing atheists. It's all like, I mean, I don't want to reduce everything to pathology. There's history, there's circumstance, there's all kinds of other things too. But that goes a long way, I think, to if while I'm wildly speculating with little evidence, those are the places I would start looking.
Yeah, I agree.
This definitely sounds to me like they want the political order to be the church, right? Is that fair to say?
Like a certain vision of it.
Well, is it just about saving souls then? Is it just?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they want something that resembles a theocracy, because that's also the best thing for human flourishing here on Earth. And again, I'm confused as to how that fits with the religion because of all the, my kingdom is not of this world and that kind of stuff. But they seem to want some sort of political theocratic body that is instantiated here on Earth, especially to make sure that art is good art, their version of good art, instead of what's happening now. It's bad. The way to fix it is to hit the rewind button and to find our universal truth that has been, delivered by Christ and then by all these other thinkers who discovered it somehow in the extraneous literature and by reading books as opposed to reading ebooks, which is bad. So, yeah, I have no understanding really what they think history is for, because you wouldn't really need to push an agenda, because pushing an agenda wouldn't advance your agenda, which is not of this world, I would think. Or they think they can redeem this world by reversing the decline of religion and Christianity, which has taken place because of secular liberalism, which has been enshrined in even and especially the states that they like. Like,
God,
this is incoherent, but maybe I'm missing something. I don't know.
it's quite incoherent. Yeah. Did anyone else pick up on in the original article that you linked, this review of that book? He's talking. Well, first there's a really funny critique of John Rawls that I don't have to get into, but maybe I will.
Do you mean Reason, Faith, and the Struggle for Western Civilization? That book?
Yeah, exactly. There's a funny critique that he quotes of John Rawls, but then right after that, he's talking about the final and logical upshot of the materialist worldview is either an amoral nihilism that seeks only personal pleasure, or a sentimental relativism that says that everybody has his or her own view of what is good and that everybody just ought to be nice to everyone else. And then he says, Dr. Esselon identifies the formerism with the male of the species and the second with the female.
Oh, so we're too feminized.
Yeah, well, no, but he says that the relativism is the feminine one, and the nihilism is the masculine one. So being a nihilist is masculine, but being a relativist is feminine.
So the Schopenhauer man versus the Hillary Clinton liberal.
I guess so. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of amusing that he just throws in that.
Again, you can criticize, the equality of every belief system under the law, which is what he's presumably talking about. So should they not be equal under the law? They never come out and say that part. But is that what's intended? Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, the critique of John Rawls might be relevant here because and this is a book review, by the way. So he's kind of going through and he's like, oh, Dr. Esselon's firm faith in an experience of our essentially communal humanity, which he positions between the radical individualism of the extreme right and the anti-humanist collectivism of the left, could offer the following much needed critique and deflation of the fashionable philosopher John Rawls. And then he goes on, his description of John Rawls is I guess he's talking about the veil of ignorance, right? Where you can't, you have to, there's problems with the veil of ignorance, right? But basically the idea is, okay, you have to reason about, well, I don't know what my social position in society is going to be, right? So from that perspective, I should try to think like what would be fair terms that I would accept, right? If I didn't know, like I might wake up and end up being like a black disabled woman, or I could be like a rich white guy, right? So it's like we need to think about, well, if you don't know, then what would be like a fair way of organizing society? And so the way that this guy describes it is he says, he asks us, nay, he demands it of us under pain of banishment from civic discourse, that we pretend that we are not sons and daughters, fathers and mothers, husbands and wives, neighbors and members of a community in this place and not another, worshiping God in this church and in these ways, and devoted to a certain vision of the good, a vision that we do not deduce from abstract principles, but either see intuitively or experience in the blood. He requires us, in short, not to be human at all, and only then, or only insofar as we can adopt the pose of the bloodless and desiccated, may we come together to form a contract, a profoundly antisocial contract, dictating civil rights, punishments, rewards, and so forth. And like,
Yeah, that's
Dude,
what I
it was a
thinking,
thought
too.
experiment. It was a thought experiment. Here's the just society. Imagine you're anyone.
yeah,
Not, oh yeah, you're
It's like,
nobody. You're
yeah.
a bloodless floating spirit.
Well, he thinks
Design
also-
society as if you could be one of the worst off. So you better make one of the worst off like not so bad. And that this is the
that's all
this
it's
is
asking.
essentially the reaction to that thought experiment. That's what I was thinking when I read this too.
yes, exactly.
It's like, you mean I'm not part of a family with a specific tradition? How is that your that I mean, that's again, that's the sort of mind at work here. It's just completely inappropriate
Well,
reactions to things.
This is so dark because the next line after that, after what you just read, is like, this makes this book worth reading.
Yeah.
Or like,
no, he's like,
wow.
that paragraph
The
alone makes the
insights of
book
this
worth reading.
paragraph alone. It's like, okay, oh my God. Birds of a feather. Holy shit.
Isn't this part of Christian charity to like think of the worst off to, you know,
Well,
like
that's what I was supposed to say.
I was poor, I was hungry and you fed me, I was in prison and you visited me, like that kind of shit. Doesn't Jesus come up in this discussion at all?
Like,
Yes.
it's very humanist.
Well, that's what I was thinking too, because I was like, no, like you're misunderstanding. He's actually not asking you to pretend you're no one. He's actually trying to get you to think about like other people. Like that's literally like, just think of other people.
For
just think,
shame.
how about you think about other people? And it's like, you're asking me to think about not being a church going person.
Yeah.
Like, how dare you? That means that you're thinking of me
like-
not being a human being. It's like, just think about other people. How about like Jesus taught you?
It's like it's like a sympathy blindness. It's like they're unable to empathize with other people, and in fact actively offended when they are asked to empathize with people who are not
Exactly.
them or not like them. And it's very strange. It's very strange. So
he goes
to
on.
hold
he
up
go-
Rawls
he-
as an anti-humanist in this way is very strange to me.
He goes on to say, materialism, he argues, is a bankrupt worldview that kills wonder, gratitude, and friendship, reducing man to a handful of mud that can be shaped and reshaped at will by the autonomous individual and amorphous state. The materialist may be claimed to be guided by goodness or justice or duty, but his system cannot provide a foundation for any of these things.
So being concerned with like the equal distribution of, you know, essentials like access to water and food and air and clothing and shelter, like that's materialism here. They're heavy-handedly calling that materialism, and thinking
Right,
that
which
those
is
should be
arguable.
relatively equally distributed is sort of
Yeah.
inhuman. Like you're asking people
Yeah,
not
it's
to be humans when you want the world to be like sort of relatively equal like that. And it's
Yeah, you're saying that like it's so bad to think about other people. You're making me think about like you're trying to make me not be a selfish asshole,
yeah,
and like
that's
that's destroying everything that it means to be human.
I know that's freed. It's my freedom to be a selfish jackass and like try to accrue as much wealth as possible, which may mean I'll have to take bread from out of hungry people's mouths in order to realize my humanity. You're asking me to not do that? It's
God, maybe we need to read this book.
No,
That's
oh my
incredible.
God. Can I just read these two sentences come right next to each other, right? Relativism is nihilism for girls.
Yeah, exactly.
End
That's
of
what I was saying
paragraph.
before.
Then the next paragraph says, our only hope to counter this free fall. And remember, relativism is just, imagine you were born as the worst person in society. How would you want to be treated, right? That's what relativism is. Our only hope to counter this free fall into nihilism and relativism is a return to reality, not the false reality of the materialists, but the true reality of those who worship the word. The only way to become real is to join ourselves to Christ, who gives us our being by his love.
Oh, my
Oh,
COVID
man.
ravaged lungs can't handle it.
Christ's love is, do not make me think of other people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Christ wasn't,
Exactly.
I thought it was interesting. There was a decree. I just read, I forget which century it was. Definitely early modern decree from the Catholic Church that on the poverty of Christ, this is what it was called, the poverty of Christ. And they called it heretical to believe that the poverty of Christ was literal, that like wealth is kind of a sin. And the Catholic Church, there's a papal bull deciding on this debate about the poverty of Christ. And it decided in
Of
favor
course.
of, like wealth is not a sin. Christ's poverty was like his decision, I guess, basically.
Of course the fucking Pope would say that from his gold-gilded throne.
I'm getting the poverty of Christ vibes.
I know the bull you're talking about, and it was written in response to, I think it was like late Middle Ages, maybe during the Avignon papacy. But this guy, I think maybe a Franciscan, wrote a tract that was viscerally critical of the Catholic Church, and I think it's called The Poverty of the Apostles, something like that. And it says stuff like, remember Christ and his followers who slept under the stars, and then compare it to these priests or these church officials who go to bed in their golden beds, and then compare them, or Christ walking barefoot in the dirt, to these these church officials riding their horses that are covered in gold. And he wrote this whole thing back and forth, like compare the way they're living to those who they purport to emulate. And then the response is, no, the poverty doesn't have to be literal, and they eventually threw him in prison for being a heretic.
Yeah, because you had the Franciscans who were like taking vows of poverty. And so, so this was like late Middle Ages, early 14th century. Yeah, you had the Franciscan order sort of living Christ's life like that, like imitating his poverty, his having no possessions. People would join the Franciscan order. Sometimes like rich folk would do it and like give up all their worldly possessions. And the Pope John the 22nd declared it a heretical doctrine to promote the poverty of Christ as so it means
Like,
it's kind of a spiritual poverty. Yeah.
Let's just forget, blessed are the meek, they will be comforted. Blessed are the
or like
poor,
the eye
they will
of the
be
needle,
fed.
camel through the eye of the needle thing, right? It's harder to get into heaven for a rich person than it would be to put the camel through the eye of the needle. Is that how it goes? Probably not word for word.
Yeah, something like that.
The amount of citations you could give to Jesus talking about wealth, as opposed to the 0 times that Jesus,
all that was figurative.
the 0 times that he talks about like homosexuality.
That was all metaphorical, dude. It meant, accrue as much wealth as possible. Fuck your neighbor. That's what it meant. Just in spirit, you have to be poor and charitable.
Let's just finish up this awesome article. I love this, honestly. The materialist may not believe in hell, but he does not have to. He has already built it on earth. Dr. Esselin would free us from that man-made hell and return us to the word-created world where goodness, truth, and beauty are real and can be known.
It's like,
Amen.
Like Mephistopheles and Dr. Faustus.
All right. Is anyone, you guys want to convert? We can take your confession, your first confession right here. No take. After discovering this website, I am much further from converting than I was before. So congratulations on doing the Lord's work.
Do you know that when I was a little kid, my dad took me into a church to just show me like what it like, just to give me some cultural understanding. And like he tried to give me communion, or he was like, I guess they were all lining up to take their communion wafers or whatever. And I don't actually remember this, but he always told me the story, and I like lined up. And when I got there, the priest was like, I guess I'm not allowed if you're too young or something like that. So he was like, no, you can't take it, because like, I don't know why. I was just like a little kid. And then so my dad got in line and then like took it and pretended to put it in his mouth and then actually gave it to me later.
Didn't Jesus say, like, do not prevent the children from coming to me?
Yeah, exactly. And then I like how my dad stole the communion wafer and pretended to like, and then just because I think I was like a little bitch and like I was crying because I wanted the snack, like I thought it would be like delicious. And it was actually just like a shitty wafer.
I've had a Catholic communion wafer. I think I'm not supposed to take it because you have to be taken into the church somehow through some ritual, but they're really gross.
Yeah.
They taste like a flavorless rice cracker.
Yeah, I think, don't they like stick to the roof of your mouth?
Yeah.
They're kind of like the same material that like those. You remember those little candies that were like a styrofoam thing that had all the sour powder inside?
It's definitely, yeah, it tastes like styrofoam for sure.
Yeah.
I've never tasted the body.
You've never tasted
The body of Christ.
I've never had.
That's what that professor that was my parents' friend must have meant, eh? That like that's what he wanted to meant by participating in the body of Christ.
You know,
Taking the wafer.
if I wanted that, I could just order a package and put some packing peanuts in my mouth. Body of Christ.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, why don't we leave it
saltines.
there? This, I don't know. Like, this is actually, it was funny to read, but it comes off really dark.
We should send it to some of the writers to our podcast and be like, hey, do you want to come on sometime? Here's what we thought.
Yeah, I want to get Dr. Esselin.
Yeah, get Esselin.
Dr. Esselin, Sex and the Unreal City, The Demolition of the Western Mind.
They'll crush us with their right-wing network of think tanks and dark money.
I wonder how many people read this blog.
I mean, there's a lot of posts, so
I mean, the people are the people they're reviewing. I don't know if the reviewers are. I haven't looked into them, but you know, like some of the authors that they're reviewing.
there's quite a few like Ivy League authors on here, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at the about Meet the Editors too, and I'm just like seeing W. Winston Elliott III. Holy shit.
Oh my god.
He's, and guess what? Founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief. The founder. Of course the founder would be someone named W. Winston Elliott III.
This is a super Anglo-Saxon name. He might be a convert to Catholicism. Definitely the name of a true soldier in the army of Western civilization.
That's
Oh
why
my
I say if we just
God.
became like a right-wing podcast and started like asking the Heartland Institute for money, we would just be rich. We could just capitulate and we'd be fucking laughing all the way to the bank.
Conservatives love those stories of the convert, right? The one who
Crossing the
becomes
aisle.
crossing the aisle, and they're like, "Oh my God, what was it like to be a left-winger?" And now, like, you've seen the light.
The world as illuminated by true Christian love and charity.
Yeah.
All right. We bless you all. We wish you Christ's sanctifying love to
God bless.
keep you and bless you, and God be with you. There we go.
Amen. Amen, motherfucker.